Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today for this session on automation and bug bounties to work smarter. Let's do a formal introduction part. The general, who am I? Yep. So, I am a co-founder at DEFCON Dehradun, and we as a group have conducted numerous workshops and sessions related to security. I, along with my team, have also presented RFID Hacking Village at besides Ahmedabad. If any one of you went to that conference, also, I guess we would have met there. Apart from this, I am a part-time bug bounty hunter. I like to solve HTTP boxes whenever I get some time, and also really like to automate various tasks at hand, which is also the topic for the discussion today. So that's it about me. Let's get started with the session. So let's just take a few minutes to understand what are we going to achieve through this session today. This is not about making you familiar with any methodologies or existing tools. Like there are tons of awesome material out there by some awesome people, uh, which cover these topics in great depth. Like if you want to have a good feel about some great methodology, like how you can get started with bug bounties and want to know or explore some methodology, then Jason Haddix's bug bounty methodology are always a delight to you know just follow. Then there are live streaming of recons done by Namsec on his Twitch channel, and also there are numerous awesome automated recon scripts out there on GitHub, which you can just download and play and like decide for yourself which one works for you. I guess one such cool script will be introduced to you by Prasoon just after my session, so stay tuned for that. Mm, so apart from this, we are going to understand why we need automation while we are approaching any target, or like when we are performing any sort of general tasks. Automation, I'll be sharing with you some tips on how you can automate various tasks at hand using Python. Using any language of your choice, it's just a matter of um, your choice. I use Python, but this is not a hard and fast rule that you also have to use the same. It's just how well efficient you want to become with one language. If you are good with that, just you can perform this any operation with that language itself, so don't need to worry about that. So we'll see some libraries to get familiar with if you want to get started with it. Then we'll see some concepts like concurrency and parallelism. Like automation is not just about getting your tasks done automatically, but it also depends, or it also needs to be done in a most efficient and the like optimized manner. So we'll also see various approaches that we can do our automation in. Like there is a sequential approach, then a multi-threaded or asynchronous approach. Like multi-threaded and asynchronous are like somewhat different concepts, but I have mentioned them in the same line because they are comparable. Then there is a multi-processing execution of scripts. So we'll see various what are the advantages of these various approaches and when we should use them. We'll also see the speed comparisons of these. So first of all, definitely why automation is necessary. It saves a lot of time for us, so we can better focus on other things in life. And automation is simply cool. Like these are motivation for some people. So now, when we talk about using Python for automating various tasks, we need to get familiar with not just the normal syntaxes or lists or dictionaries of Python, like that is the baseline of it, but we also need to get familiar with certain libraries. This is a non-exhaustive list. It's like very high level overview or very high level list of uh, libraries that you need to get familiar with if you want to perform any sort of automation. like the OS library is used to perform operating system specific tasks using Python, like getting a list of directories, interacting with the files, interacting with the operating system, forking any processes, or running any specific commands. So these sort of operations can be done using OS library. Then requests library is used for making any sort of web server request with your choice of options. You can set various, you can use various HTTP verbs like get, put, post, your choice. Then you can specify the cookies you want to send. Also, you can manipulate the headers. Many options are there, so you can explore that. Then JSON is there to help us process the JSON data using Python. Then there is Selenium. So Selenium is an interesting library because it's basically a browser automation framework. So what that does is it helps us interact with any browser like Chrome or Firefox in the manner that we generally as uh, graphically do. Like if I go to Firefox, like okay, if I just go to Firefox and I have types google.com and search for Selenium. So all of these operations which I have done manually, they all can be done and achieved using Selenium framework. Like opening the Firefox browser to typing google.com, searching the query, entering the clicking the search button. So everything can be done using Selenium itself. So how it's different from requests, if you ask, then our modern l- web frameworks or like the modern applications are very dynamic in nature, and they generally try to put most of the processing on client side nowadays. So those dynamic content are not, we are not able to interact with that dynamic content using the requests library. And if you have some specific automation tasks at hand that need to be that need to also take consideration into the dynamic nature of your application, so then that in that particular use case your Selenium framework will be most applicable. Now, coming to the last four, these are basically, I would say they are more targeted towards power automators. Like if you want to up your automation game and really are focused upon getting the maximum efficiency, getting those that raw performance out of your hardware, so these libraries are um, aimed at that, and we are going to discuss these and today. So like I said, automation is not just about getting your tasks done, but we need to also ensure that they are done in the most optimized manner, right? So let's let's just see some code and explore the requests library so we can compare our speeds with the sequential and like the multi-threaded approach like I just said. So let's simply see it in action. So this is the code which I have written, which simply it's very normal thing. It simply goes to a URL you specify and gets its response. Nothing fancy here, but it's just for demonstration purposes. Like if you want to do anything, any other thing from the response, then you can perform any sort of operation. So we have imported requests, time, and OS libraries. So first of all, let's take a bottom-up approach, understanding this code a bit. So first of all, the Python sees this main definition call line. It goes here, then like capture the time, the start time. URLs list, it calls another function read file, which simply opens a test. like I have specified a directory structure in the test word lists. There is a 10 urls.txt file. Like if I show you, I have randomly chosen any 10 URLs out of the internet. So it read this particular file and saves them in a sort of list in Python. Like if you come from a different programming background, you might know it as array, although they are not very equal, but yes, you can compare that. So it stores those URLs line by line, read that and stores it into a list, then calculates the length. Now it simply calls the the synchronous requests, which we are going to perform on this URL list. So if I go to this function, it will iterate over the URLs which we have stored previously, and simply does the it utilizes the requests library like I have imported here, and the get function makes a get request to that particular URL. So you have specified the URL which you want to explore and perform which operation on that. Like it's a get request, so you have so we can specify that. After that, it simply waits for the processing to be done and the text to be uh, responded back, and prints that this URL has been accessed. And if there is any connection timeout error, so it simply prints in like timeout browsing while browsing that particular URL. So let's try to run it and see how much time it takes for it to get scanned. Like how much time it takes in all to complete this request. So like it goes on sequentially to all those URLs, wait for them to complete their requests, and like it approximately made synchronous requests on 10 URLs and ended in approximately 8.384 seconds. So this is fine if you have very small targets to explore or test. But the problem arises when we have huge chunks of data to process, and generally our scopes are very big in nature, and we if we are performing any sort of automation, we definitely want to we are definitely aiming at easing up our big chunks of data tasks, not these like 10 URLs. I can definitely go on manually, even manually I can do that. So we are aiming at higher chunks of data, right? So for that, like there is a problem with this particular implementation. If I go again to any website and see it's how much time it takes for these all these resources to get loaded into my browser. If I see here carefully, like only the root directory which gets loaded here. Okay, if I click on the timing, this particular tab shows me all the timings that this request has waited for, like what time it took for the DNS resolution, how much time connecting, TLS setting up, and everything. So we can see that all of these tasks were at my end, at the browser's end, or at the client's end. But these were the things that we have waited for all the response to get generated from the server. Like 148 milliseconds was only our waiting time. That was a wastage of our time, and all the receiving part, that these many milliseconds it took for us to completely receive all of the data from the web server. So the problem I was referring to earlier is, like if we want to explore or test 100 or 500 or thousands of URL, this approach simply goes on to a particular URL, waits for the response to get completed, or and then after it has completely made those requests, then it goes to the second URL and then third and so on. So that's a wastage of our time, because In this 148 milliseconds plus 94 milliseconds of time, it is our client, our CPU or our resources on our systems, they are simply doing nothing. So our idea is to simply uh, optimize this approach. So how we can do that? For that, we need to perform something which is known as concurrent processing. We need to perform multitasking. Like if I take, for example, if you go to a bar, there is a bartender. It doesn't mean for a bartender to only attend only one client. No, he or she can handle multiple clients at once or customers. If a customer asks for a drink, the bartender doesn't wait for the customer to complete his or her drink and then go to the next customer. They simply make and serve the drink and move on to the next customer, and the chain goes on. And if the first one again comes up and says, hey, I want another one, so we can serve their request afterwards, but we do not need to wait for them to complete all of their drinks and then we will go to the other customers. That's a complete wastage of resource, right? So this is concurrency. Like a single person, a single resource is doing multiple things at once. And if I talk about parallelism, if we have like the sports season coming up, football matches or cricket matches are coming up, so there are many customers coming at once. So it takes very it becomes very difficult for a single person to handle all of those customers. So what we can do, we can increase our staff, we can increase our resources allotted to all those particular tasks at hand, the customers, so that we can have a better efficient approach at serving all of those requests. So that's the idea about parallelism. Com- Completing our tasks simultaneously. But concurrency is only a single person is doing multiple things, but parallelism is multiple things are done by multiple resources or people. So if I go by the definition, a single CPU resource is used to perform multiple tasks in concurrency, but in parallel execution, multiple CPU resources, or the which we call the CPU cores, are used to perform multiple tasks. Concurrency is attained like when like this process of giving and serving the one drink to one customer, then switching to the next customer. It is in this in our field is known as context switching. Like one task is completed and we want to give that resource to another task, so we pause that particular operation for a certain moment of time and give those resources to another one so that everyone gets some chance to perform their operations. That is context switching. So but parallelism, again, since they are all divided among multiple cores of the CPU, so they don't need to be switched back and forth. They can have the resources allotted to them as long as they want to, so that they can simply comfortably perform all of their operations and then exit from that resource. So concurrency generally uses threads to perform their tasks, and the parallelism, the parallel execution, takes generally uses different processes to perform their parallel execution. So there are different methods to achieve concurrency in Python. There is multi-threading, there is for parallelism we can go with multi-processing, but today we are going to discuss a different approach, that is asynchronous input output, which is not very different from multi-threading, but in its core implementation it's really different. If we go into depth of how asynchronous input output works in the backend, it's really different. Multi-threading simply makes operating system level threads So we are limited in creating those, because creating an operating system level thread is quite an expensive operation. But how asynchronous input output works, it creates something which is known as coroutines in Python. So handling of all the tasks is done at the programming level itself and not the operating system. In multi-threading, what happens is, if I'm allotting my different tasks to different threads, the operating system is in control of making, like which I told you, the context switching. The thread get uh, can be grabbed out of the resource, and another thread can be given that resource anytime, like anytime. That we don't have control over, that the operating system does. But the asynchronous input output gives that control to us, and we decide when we want to free the resource. Like if I want to perform a request, I will perform that request, and only then I will release the resource, because I know only after I have made a particular request, only then I have to wait for the response from the server. So that's what basically the very high level explanation. It's not very in depth, but this is what asynchronous input output basically does. So if I yeah, if we explore this code, the asynchronous approach, again the main function is there. It takes the time, it reads the file, the 10 urls to text, again the same file, then it calculates the length. Then this is what is different in asynchronous input output approach. The event loop, this is something new in this which I the thing which I told you about scheduling of various tasks. This is the manager of all those tasks. This loop, event loop, all the tasks communicate with the event loop when they want to release the resource, and this event loop decides when another task gets that resource. Here the resource which I'm talking about is a CPU core, or the processing unit, and the task which I am mentioning here is like various tasks: task 1, task 2, task 3, 4, and so on. These are the various tasks that I need to perform, like perform a request to youtube.com or facebook.com. So these are the tasks that I need to perform. So this event loop is like a manager of all these tasks. So I will be having 10 tasks, and this event loop will be managing all these 10 tasks. So again, this will ensure that all of those 10 tasks get completed and then only come out of the loop. Then we have asynchronous request generator function, in which we have passed a URL list. By default, this library has a 5 minutes timeout. Like if my URL is not live, is not found live, it waits for 5 minutes. So it's very large time. So I have cut short to 10 seconds for demonstration purposes, but depends upon the various tasks we need to perform, and will vary upon every unique use case. So we have performed here HTTP AIO HTTP dot client session. Then we have we have specified our timeout. Then here we are registering the tasks for every URL in the URL lists. Again, reading all of these URLs one by one and registering them over, and sending the request to this particular function where we are actually performing the get task. Before that, this is the syntactical this is only syntax. It just simply, what it does is let all the tasks to be run in background. Like start tasks, it simply tells, because uh, 10 tasks were assigned here, so it knows that there are 10 tasks to be performed in this loop. So it will just wait for all those 10 tasks to get completed, and only then it will go back. This await keyword is used when I want to specify. This is the place where it specifies that, okay, now I know I'll be waiting for the response from the server. So now I can give the resource back to the manager, the event loop, so that other operations, other useful, meaningful things can be done by other tasks which are waiting in the queue. Okay. So again, if we go to this request, this function, async requests, we have specified our URL, we have specified the session which we just registered here. So again, we are making a get request on the URL. Like if I go and show you the previous one, it's just on the similar lines and just a difference of the syntax. But if we compare with the general template or the structure, it's almost similar. Okay. So again, we are doing a get request on the URL, then awaiting the response. Again, await is here because the task knew that after making a request like this get request, after clicking the hit button on the request, the task knew that it will be waiting for the response from the server end. So that's where it knows, it tells that I'm waiting for the response. So it goes back to the event loop right here, event loop, and event loop knows that there are various other tasks at hand that can uh, perform the request on the URL. In the meanwhile, like first youtube.com got executed and it is waiting for the response to come back from the server. So it tells that to the event loop. Event loop knows now facebook.com is also in the queue, so it allows facebook.com to make the request. Now facebook.com knows that I am waiting the response from the server, so it will go on and on like that. So we are not wasting any time here. We are not waiting for youtube.com to get completed and then only we are going to facebook.com. No, we are going through the list first and waiting for all of those responses to at once. So that's an optimization on our level. We cannot optimize the time which it takes for the web server to process or our network latencies, but what we can optimize is our own processing of the data. So that's what we are trying to do here. So let's try it out and see if it actually helps us or not. As we can see here, same 10 URLs in the synchronous approach and in the asynchronous approach. We ended up in 2.64 seconds approximately, and previously in the synchronous approach we were waiting for we ended up in 8 seconds. So this is a direct comparison of only on just 10 URLs. I have run some tests on 500 URLs also, again randomly taken over the internet. So these URLs, when 500 URLs, such URLs, random URLs were run up on against that synchronous code, were made to have these like took around 621 seconds, and again the synchronous approach took around 10 seconds to access all those 500 URLs. Like I'll try and explain this big gap, why we are getting all of this big gap. Processing a file and making some requests is not a very big deal for a CPU. So like asynchronous, I have told you that if even if a particular URL is taking a lot of time to get loaded, we are not waiting for that to make our second request or do our other tasks. What we are doing is like we are performing all of our tasks from our end and then waiting for all of them together for them to respond back. So that's why, since I have mentioned in my timeout, like I have already told you that I have mentioned the timeout to be 10 seconds here. So maximum amount of time, so minimum amount of time that this code will have to wait will be 10 seconds, because the 10 seconds of time I have specified into the code, that it will need to check if any of the URL was not found live or was taking too much time to load. It will wait for 10 seconds before performing a timeout on that. So it will at least have to wait for 10 seconds. And after that, if all of the URLs, like as per their speeds and as per their latencies, they got loaded, so the final time, like it took around this many seconds. So you can see a huge gap in the time of execution between these two simple requests on 500 URLs, right? So this approach is very useful if we want to perform an input output bound task. Now, what is an input output bound task? It's simply when we are performing some operation and we are waiting for external resources. In our case, that is the web server and our network, internet speed also. So these are the external resources that we are dependent upon for performing our operations and for, like, uh, we are waiting for them to process all the resources that we are requesting. But what if we have to perform some operations that have nothing to do with any external resource, like CPU intensive tasks? If we want to perform some analysis on downloaded files, if there is a static analysis on APK files for that discussion, if if you want to do some analysis on APK files, like static analysis, want to find some hard-coded credentials on APK files or something like that, so you want to also optimize that approach as well. So how to optimize that approach? For that, we'll be using multi-processing and not the asynchronous input-output or the multi-threading. And why is it so? I'll explain it. I'll try and explain it. Like now again, if we go to the bartender example, there were people who were making an order, and once you have done your task, you wouldn't be waiting for the people to complete their drinks and then you will be switching to the other customer, right? But what if only a single person or a single group of people have made a huge request or a huge order? Then only that one person is going to be busy with handling out all of that order at once. So until that task gets completed, he or she cannot move on to the other task or the other customer's request. So that's when multi-processing comes into play. We need extra resources because we have a high foothold in the bar. We need extra resources to handle all those requests efficiently. If only one person is going to handle all the requests, then it will take a lot of time and it will not be a very good experience. But what if we expand our resources? If we increase our efficient worker from 1 to 4 or 8 or something like that, so we can distribute those groups among all those bartenders and we can perform parallel execution of those tasks. So this is what we are trying to achieve here, because now we are not waiting for our customers to perform for like complete their task on their end, because we are getting so many requests at once. There, this is a CPU intensive task. This is a intensive task on our end. We have to do much processing on our end. So that's when multiprocessing comes into play. So like I have told you, if you have some APK files at hand, you can decompile it using tools like APK tools, JADX, whatever feels natural to you. And after that, if you want to perform any a regular expression check or any keywords searching on those files, then instead of performing sequential grep, we can distribute the our grep or search operation on two different cores of our CPUs. Like if you have a four core CPU, then you can perform distribute those tasks among two of them or maybe four of them as per your background operations also come into play in this. Like if your computer is not doing, or if your PC is not doing anything, then you may go ahead and take a bold move of like distributing this such intensive operation on multiple on every core of the CPU. But if you are like if you want to perform some operations on the CPU as well, or the computer as well, so you need to be careful about these numbers on how many cores you want to distribute your tasks. So that's a thing that we need to like play with these numbers to get the most optimal performance. So like again, just for normal demonstration purpose, I have taken two APK files, file 1 and file 2. It's again taking a time stamping and taking two files of APKs. Then I have created one process whose target is this. Target means the function that we want to trigger with this process. Then its arguments list, tuple, which is APK files of 0 means like the first APK. It's very basic structure that I have built just to give you an idea about how we go about multiprocessing our tasks. Then again, I have registered a second process with APK files of index 1, that is file2.apk file. If you feel like this is a weird syntax here, like APK file of 0 and I have put a comma here, that's wrong. If you feel like that, but it's not wrong. The developers of this module have left it like that. I don't like it's just the thing we have to live with. But if we had multiple arguments like argument 2, argument 3, then we don't need to put a comma at the end. It's just for if we have a single argument to be passed to the function, only then we need to do this. So yes, after registering these processes into P1 and P2 variable, we have just started those processes. And once we start these processes, they just go on and register themselves on different CPU cores. So they execute parallelly. Like both the CPU cores are performing these operations parallelly. They are not concurrent processes anymore. They are parallel processes because they are happening simultaneously. So now this join function, it simply waits for the processes to get completed. Only then it will go to the next line. So what it does, what this our search keywords function does, it simply searches for password keyword in the APK file. Nothing fancy here again, it's just for demonstration purpose. So it will open the file, the directory in which our APK's decompiled version is available. Then I'll be storing a static analysis results.txt file in the append mode. Then there is a sub process module, which we have also created a sub process module. It is this module is used to invoke operating system level commands. You can also perform it using OS module, but this is a better approach to perform when we need to perform some terminal or CMD commands to be run using Python. So this is the syntax for that. Subprocess will run the command which we have specified here. grep, these are the flags which we are using for the grep, and the password keyword against the APK file which we want to explore. Then we can go ahead with writing all of the operation, writing all of the output that we get into the result. That is this file which we have opened. Like this syntax is basically saying that open this file in this variable result. So if we have put our standard output to result, then everything that this command, the grep password command, will generate, it will just get appended or saved into this file. After that, it simply says that results are saved and exit. So if I show you the speed comparisons for this code in the sequential and multiprocessing manner, then searching for only a particular password keyword in file1 and file2.apk files took around 250 seconds, but the parallel grep execution, it took around 194 seconds. As you can see the difference also in the outputs of those two files, like it searched for keyword in file 1, completed file 1, then went to file 2. But in this one, it started for file 1 and file 2 simultaneously, then results were completed for both of them, and then it just got completed in lesser time as compared to the sequential graph. So these are the things that we need to focus while automating our things. Like again, I'm simply just repeating, I know I'm repeating myself, but automation needs these things to be thought of. Sequential is like, okay, if you want to perform like some quick and dirty scripts you want to write for performing a very small amount of operations, then it's fine, then we don't need to go for these complex writing structures, then sequential is fine. But if we want to perform, or if we want to write some good optimized code or scripts for performing huge chunks of for processing, yeah, huge chunks of data, then we need to uh, think in these lines, the concurrency and parallel lines. uh, I guess we come to an end with this. So like, if you have any, if you want to connect with me, then these are the links. You can connect with me over LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm always open to a good discussion. If you have any like ideas, you want support, you want to discuss about something, you can always reach me. Also, I hope whatever we have discussed today was really helpful to you in one way or another, and I hope to see GitHub flooded with some really optimized scripts and tools. Thank you all again for connecting with us today, and keep hunting, keep researching, uh, and make our virtual universe safer. Thank you all.